The ceasefire was supposed to calm the world down. Instead, it may have exposed how much power has already shifted. Oil did fall below $100 a barrel, and markets reacted fast. In Asia, investors rushed back into risk. Some Korean stocks jumped by 11% within minutes of the open. On the surface, that looked like relief. It looked like the danger had passed, but the real story sits in the fine print of the ceasefire itself. The United States and Iran agreed to a 2-week pause. Iran also confirmed the deal on the condition of 0 U.S. attacks on its territory. That sounds like de-escalation, but the structure of the agreement tells a very different story. Iran is still keeping full control of Hormuz. That matters more than the ceasefire headline. Oil can still leave the Persian Gulf only under Iranian terms and conditions. According to the Iranian foreign minister, safe passage remains conditional. Ships would move through coordination with Iran's armed forces and with due consideration of technical limitations. That means the route is not truly open. It is managed. The toll booth is still in effect. And once that becomes the reality, oil is no longer just flowing through a neutral trade corridor. It is being controlled and monetized by the side that holds the choke point. That opens the door to a very different system, where a roughly $2 million toll is not paid in dollars, and where settlement could shift into Chinese yuan or even cryptocurrency. So even with prices pulling back and stocks bouncing, the deeper message is hard to miss. This ceasefire did not settle the balance of power. It may have locked in a new one with terms that now reach far beyond the battlefield. If Trump accepts even part of the framework now on the table, the outcome moves sharply in Tehran's favor. Iran's 10-point plan becomes a workable base. That includes continued uranium enrichment, a withdrawal of U.S. combat forces from the region, and a broader commitment to non-aggression. If Russia and China end up serving as guarantors, that places even tighter limits on future U.S. action and gives Iran more room to operate. At the same time, Iran would not be giving up control where it matters most. Hormuz could remain under Iranian influence, and the toll system could continue during the ceasefire, potentially shared with Oman. That means Iran would be gaining leverage not only through diplomacy, but through direct control over one of the world's most important energy choke points. The sanctions side matters just as much. Iran wants shadow fleet restrictions removed. It wants banking isolation lifted. It wants foreign banks to trade with Iran without being hit by secondary sanctions from Washington. If that happens, Iranian oil can move far more freely into BRICS markets and even into Europe, where demand for cheap barrels remains strong. Then there is the money already locked away. Around $2 billion has been frozen by the U.S. Treasury. Another $6 billion sits frozen in Qatar. Across the global economy, Iran has lost access to more than $50 billion, and the real number may be even higher. If these barriers start coming down, the total flow back to Iran could reach $100 billion. That kind of release would harden the regime, rebuild its damaged oil infrastructure, and reduce its dependence on Western systems. And once oil sales, shipping access, and frozen capital all begin moving again, Iran's leverage starts expanding far beyond the battlefield. Iran is not just gaining leverage over a shipping route. It is sitting on enough energy power to turn that leverage into a currency shift. Iran can produce 4.6 million barrels of oil per day. It also holds around 28 billion barrels in reserves, putting it behind Saudi Arabia and Venezuela among the largest holders. That gives Tehran room to play a longer game. The model is straightforward. Iran can sell its own oil at a discount while making rival flows more expensive. If Saudi cargoes face added fees through Hormuz, Iranian barrels become more attractive by comparison. That changes more than price competition. It starts influencing how buyers choose to settle trade. And that is where the pressure on the petrodollar really grows. Iran is already moving more of its oil trade into Chinese yuan and further outside the dollar system. Russia and China both benefit from that arrangement. They supported Iran diplomatically, blocked moves against it at the United Nations, and have every reason to back energy flows that bypass the dollar. For them, a BRICS partner controlling Hormuz is not a problem. It is an opening. The demand side is already there. China and India together buy 6.7 million barrels a day. Greater Asia buys another 6.2 million. These are the markets that matter most because the majority of Gulf oil already moves east. And those buyers are far more willing than before to pay in local currencies, especially the Chinese yuan, if that gives them secure access and better terms. Once that starts becoming normal, the dollar loses one of its most important supports. Oil trade helped build the system that kept global demand for dollars strong. If a larger share of energy starts clearing outside that framework, the effects do not stay inside the oil market for long. They begin spreading into reserves, capital flows, and the assets countries trust most. Countries that settle less trade in dollars do not need to hold as many dollars. And if they do not need as many dollars, they also have less reason to keep recycling those surpluses into US Treasuries. That is where the pressure starts moving from geopolitics into the core of the financial system. Money does not just disappear when it leaves one reserve asset. It looks for another place to go. And right now, one of the clearest destinations is gold. That helps explain why gold prices have already rebounded from the Iran war shock and are still up 8% year to date. At the same time, the S&P 500 remains down more than 3%. Markets are already telling us where confidence is moving. Central banks were buying before this latest escalation even began. They added more than 27 tons last month alone, and that was before the Iran war added a whole new layer of uncertainty. If the petrodollar keeps weakening, that buying pressure can rise even more because gold becomes more than a hedge. It becomes a reserve alternative for countries that want protection from financial pressure, sanctions risk, and dollar volatility. The problem for the United States is that this shift arrives at a moment when the domestic economy is already under stress. Higher rates and higher inflation are a brutal mix for an economy built on constant expansion. Consumers need to keep spending, companies need to keep borrowing, hiring needs to keep moving, but US assets are already heavily leveraged and expensive, and the Federal Reserve has already signaled how serious the slowdown may be.
But the thing that I think a good number of people on the committee are concerned about is just the very, very low level of job creation. If you adjust what has been the trend job creation over the past, let's say, 6 months, if you adjust that for what we think, our staff thinks, is the overstatement due to overcounting, effectively there's zero net job creation in the private sector.
That is a major warning sign. It tells us the economy is losing momentum at the same time global demand for dollar assets is becoming less secure. So this is no longer just a story about oil routes or wartime headlines. The repricing has started across markets already. And when countries see that kind of shift, they do not sit still. They start repositioning reserves, custody, and trust. That question quickly becomes very practical. Central banks today hold nearly 39,000 tons of gold, which is about 18% of all above-ground supply. That is an enormous pool of reserve wealth, and the location of that metal matters just as much as the amount. For decades, a large share of the world's gold was held in New York. That gave countries liquidity and access to deep financial markets, but it also left those reserves under US jurisdiction. And in a world shaped by sanctions, asset freezes, and growing financial pressure, that begins to look like a direct vulnerability. Gold stored in the United States carries the risk of confiscation, restrictions, or delays in getting it back. Germany already learned part of that lesson. It repatriated some of its gold between 2013 and 2017, and the process took years. That alone sent a message. But France may have shown the world a much faster way out. Instead of waiting for approval and physical delivery, France sold gold in New York, then bought it back in Europe. In the process, it turned a $2.9 billion loss into an $8 billion profit. More importantly, it avoided US custody risk and handed other countries a clear playbook. That changes the map of global finance. If more central banks follow that logic, new gold hubs stand to benefit. Singapore becomes more important. Hong Kong gains relevance. Mainland China stands out the most. The more gold that moves into Chinese custody or into financial networks closer to China, the stronger China's system begins to look. Custody creates credibility. Credibility attracts more reserve flows, and once that process starts, financial gravity does not stay centered where it used to be. Even if the fighting cools down, countries have already seen how quickly control, access, and trust can change. The real issue now comes down to something much more specific. Who controls passage through Hormuz, who charges for it, and what currency gets used? That is where the real leverage sits now. If Iran keeps that position, it does not just gain breathing room, it gains a durable source of power over one of the most important energy routes in the world. Every cargo that moves under those terms pushes the region further away from the old rules. More oil can be routed through non-dollar settlement, more revenue can stay in Iran's hands, and more countries in Asia can keep adjusting to a system that no longer depends as heavily on the US dollar.
Mr. President, are you allowed to, or are you willing to end this conflict with Iran charging tolls for passage through the strait?
Us charging tolls?
Iran.
What about us charging tolls?
Is that something you're considering?
I'd rather do that than let them have them, right? Why shouldn't we? We're the winner. We won, okay? They are militarily defeated.
Even Trump's own comments show how central this toll issue has become. Both sides understand that control over passage now means control over money, pricing, and political leverage. And if that structure holds after the ceasefire, the financial effects keep building long after the battlefield goes quiet. So this is where the real pressure point remains. Not the headline of a pause, but the terms underneath it. Is this ceasefire a victory or defeat for Trump? And will countries now accelerate their move into gold? Let me know what you think. And don't forget to like and share the video. See you in the next one.